Um, but yes, if you don't feel comfortable, feel free to turn off your camera. Just for the time during the presentation, I'm just gonna ask that you keep yourselves muted. But then once we start the actual workshop, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you have questions, if you just wanna like talk through your process, you're more than welcome to. We wanna make this feel as like community oriented as possible, that we're all doing this together. I'm gonna join you in painting, so we'll see how this turns out. But anyway, I just wanted to welcome all of you, give you a little bit of information about this workshop. This is a workshop that's larger, that's part of a larger project that we've been working on with Miles. It's based on environmentally themed murals, and it's been in partnership and funded through the California Arts Council and the Ruth and Joseph Reed Foundation. So we thank them for their support of this program. If you guys want to learn more about this, you guys can always go to our website, which is www.1111acc.org. All of the information about these murals are there. We're so excited that you're here, and I just wanted to, before I move on, we have a free gift for all of you guys. So if you can please put in your name in the chat. The gift will be waiting for, if you're local to Los Angeles, it'll be waiting for you at the Theodore Payne Foundation. So just for being part of it, it's our way of saying thanks for joining us today. And we want you to go visit the Theodore Payne Foundation, and so your gift will be there. I will give you instructions at the end of the workshop as to how to pick it up. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna introduce our muralist and our art educator, Miles Lewis, and also joining us is a very special guest. It's Erin Johnson with the Theodore Payne Foundation. They're going to talk about what this native plants are and why they're important. And then we're gonna go ahead and get started with the art making process. So I'm going to hand it over to Miles.
All right, hi everybody. So again, Miles Lewis. I'm going to share my screen right now and present. All right, is that clear already?
Yeah.
Okay. So this workshop is given in sort of extension with the Oak Tenders mural that I'm producing in Reseda across from the West Valley Regional Branch Library. So the subject is our native oak trees, the Quercus agrifolia. So a wonderful thing about oak trees all around the United States, and of course focusing on our local species, is that they end up being nursery and host plants for hundreds of different creatures. They're extremely ecologically important. And so the theme again is these sort of central creatures and everything that surrounds them. So other kinds of flowering shrubs and animals, all the flora and fauna that make up our local oak, savanna, and chaparral environments. So this is still in process, just to give you a sense of how this is going up on the wall. These are some of the line drawing that I did with some friends of mine. A bunch of volunteers working on colors. Just so you know, here, oops. Just going back here. So this is the mock-up. This is what it will look like, or look approximately like this, and it's still in process here. That's that. Okay, and then who I am, I'm an artist, an art educator, and an environmental educator in the San Fernando Valley. These are some examples of my work. I do a lot of portraiture work and illustration work, and I've recently been doing more sort of environmentally themed work. Up here you see some of my students with me at the Getty Center. I've been teaching for 12 years now. Oops, sorry, this skips around a little bit. There we go, there's a little bit more of my work. The bottom right, that is a bunch of native plants done in a drawing. And we'll get started. Sorry. Okay, so two sort of ideas to set the background for what we're doing today. One, how art starts with nature. Of course, everything starts with nature, but how the observation of natural forms is the beginning of all art and also all written language. And then about how art allows us to make the invisible visible, and how that is scientifically important in addition to being important in so many other human ways. But beginning with a few examples of how art, or a focus on sort of natural subjects, translates directly into the foundation for art forms. On the left-hand side, this is a still life that was found in a house in Herculaneum after, huge volcanic explosion. It was preserved, but there's a beautiful series, and you can look these up. If you look up still lifes, Herculaneum, you can find, I think it's 10 to 20 of these still lifes that were painted on the walls in a kitchen or a dining room space. And what are these paintings for? They are to focus our attention on something beautiful, on something basic, on something that we enjoy as a foundational part of our existence, and the beginning of still life thousands of years ago. On the right-hand side, Egyptian hieroglyphics, right? So our writing systems are all based on observing flowers, on observing body parts, on observing mountains and rivers and all of that, and translating them into written systems. Two other examples here. So of course, we take what we observe in the natural world and we synthesize it, right? So the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Teotihuacan. Right? We have a long history of creating monsters, of finding natural forms that we combine into final representations. On the right-hand side, a bat ornament. Long history of all forms of ornamentation based on observing beautiful, interesting, and suggestive natural forms. And then on the left-hand side here, I'm sort of taking a very short tour of the world. On the left side here, we have this page of sketches by Katsushika Hokusai, who is one of the most famous Japanese block print artists, who also did a lot of instructional drawing manuals in Japan in the early 1800s. So really cool, beautiful little drawings. And you can see how they're the basis for anime, the basis for anime and manga. All of it comes from this long tradition of drawing and graphics in Japan. And they're all natural forms, right? They are simple, observable animals within the Japanese environment. And on the right-hand side, landscape painting, right? So the Chinese especially have a really epic tradition of landscape painting. And this is by Wang Jimeng, Thousand Li of Rivers and Mountains. It's from about 1,000 years ago. And it's not purely naturalistic, right? It's not photographic at all, but it represents an attention, a focus, and a lifting up of a subject that everybody has experienced, whether it's a river landscape or it's mountains, really focusing on it, beautifying it, and making it an object of meditation. Okay, so there we go. So as I was doing a little research on, different kinds of naturalistic watercolor, because of course what we're doing today is watercolor paintings of our local flowers. I was looking at the history of this kind of painting, and interestingly, it's full of women. So some of the great sort of naturalist watercolor painters who did so much to create images that scientists and technologists and everybody involved in science and technology over the past 400, 500 years were able to use to invent new things, and to understand the natural world. A lot of them are women. So Maria Sebilla Marion is one of the foundational figures in painting flowers and the lives of insects. She cataloged a huge volume called Caterpillars. It's from about 370 years ago. She's a German woman. She traveled all around Europe, parts of Asia, and she did these beautiful little paintings depicting the different life cycles of insects, as well as the plants that they associated with, that they co-evolved with. And here's another one, Deborah Griscomb Passmore. So I don't know if you guys know, but in the late 1800s, the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, had a huge watercolor department because they weren't really using photography to take pictures of different varieties of fruits and vegetables in order to say, these are the fruits produced by these farms in Iowa or whatever it is, right? To isolate these different hybrids and varietals. They had to do watercolors. So Deborah Griscomb Passmore is one of the most accomplished pomological watercolorists, which is what you would call her. She is doing paintings of fruits and veggies. Really beautiful, just looking at these. The ones in the middle, or the left in the middle, I think are especially striking. They're really trying to give you as good a sense of sort of the texture and the depth and the reflection of these, beautiful grapes as she can. And that's part of what we're going to be focusing on today is what do we want to paint in order to identify these flowers that we'll be looking at. So those are two great historical examples of what we'll be doing today. And then So now a little bit about how images and art making makes the invisible visible, and how that has been such a service to science over hundreds of years. So this is a really beautiful geographical chart from a group of educational prints in the 1890s called Yagi's Natural History. So these prints were produced and given out to high schools and colleges all around America, depicting things like, geology. I think we have one on here. Like, look at that. How crazy is that? So the planetary system, so astronomy, sort of a basic but very beautiful and involving, engaging idea of the cosmos. They only recently had in the 1890s and early 1900s color printing technology. So really using it to drive people's imagination about what the rest of the world looks like. That's that. So a few other things. Of course, this is not what we're doing today. Actually, we are doing it in a certain way. We're doing anatomical illustrations of flowers to a certain degree. But of course, illustrating the human body has been central to any accomplishment we've had in medicine over the past 200, 300 years, right? We have to understand the separate parts in order to heal those parts, or in order to heal the whole. And so the history of medical illustration is an amazing thing to look into. Human cells, in this case, right? So of course, recently we've developed photographic technology and electron micrograph and microscopic technology, which allows us to really understand the smallest, of things that we would never be able to see, right? To really make the invisible visible in a way that we're able to appreciate and study visually. Okay, so that covers, sorry about this, sort of jumping around a little bit. And this is another example, right? Creating simple graphs and lines that represent very complex universal principles, like the light spectrum here, going from radio waves to gamma. So even a line can tell a huge, huge cosmic story. Okay, so those are those. Okay, and so these are going to be our models today: the Douglas iris and the bush monkey flower, which both occur around California and are represented out here in Southern California as well. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Aaron Johnson, who's going to give you, there we go. Or we're going to hand it over to Aaron, who's going to give a presentation on native plants, their importance, and why you might be interested in them.
Thank you so much, Miles. That was amazing. There's so many beautiful images in there, and it just really helps remind you how art helps connect us to everything. And what I love about your mural too is not just that it's about native plants, but also that it includes the human relationship as well. And so you have people in your mural as well as plants. And of course we're part of nature, and particularly where we live here in Los Angeles, there's a lot we can do to help nature and really, think about how we live in relationship rather than separate from the plants and animals that live here as well. And for those of you who are new to native plants, I'll just start by saying that, we live, you and I and all of us, we live in such an amazing place. There are literally thousands of plants here that exist nowhere else in the world. And there are, really ancient plants. We have plants, a lupin that smells like grape soda. We just have all of these totally fascinating, amazing plants that live here. And I just want to share a little bit about that with you today. And I promise I'll keep it short because I know you are here to draw. So let's see. We're going to go up to the top here. And again, I am the outreach manager at the Theodore Payne Foundation for Wildflowers and Native Plants. And we are a nursery. This is a picture here of our nursery out in Sun Valley, which is near the Burbank Airport. And we're 22 acres in a canyon. And so we grow about 80% of our plants on site here. And we sell plants and we teach classes. We're finally switching back to in-person classes, but we also have nature trails. and demonstration gardens. So we hope that you'll come visit and pick up your gift here, and also take a look around. And thinking about, the Los Angeles basin and where we live, I wanted to start with this image. It's an aerial photograph, so taken from an airplane looking down across LA. And if you could imagine, what this might have looked like 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, we've clearly had a tremendous impact on this landscape. But as a conservation organization, we truly believe that whether you have a single pot on a balcony in downtown LA, or 10 acres of land, that you can have a positive impact on this ecology. And we also, our foundation is located right over here, if you can see my mouse. And I wanted to acknowledge that we sit on the ancestral home known as Wikonga, or Place of Thorns, which is the home of the Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, and also acknowledge the more than 200 California First Nations who live here alongside us. And we really honor their traditional ecological knowledge. And if you're interested in that, we're teaching we have a lot of teachers who are Native American who have been teaching with us, which is really exciting. So we hope that you will also learn more from them as well. And so thinking about where we live, and then stepping back out again into the plants that live here, as well as the creatures, one of the reasons California native plants are so important is because they co-evolved with the plants that live here. So over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the insects have co-evolved with the plants. And one of the relationships you might have heard of before is the monarch butterfly. So this is the adult butterfly, and it's nectaring from the native Humboldt lily. But their caterpillars, this cute little caterpillar right here, only eat milkweed. And that's true for lots of our caterpillars. So many of them are very, very picky eaters. In this case, they'll eat only milkweed. But for some plants, there's more than 200 kinds of milkweed, and the native milkweed here is actually really important because when it dies back, it signals to the butterflies that they need to continue on to their way to continue their migration to the coastline where they overwinter there. So there's all of these really subtle ways that the plants and wildlife are interacting with each other. And if we want to support this biodiversity, we really have to provide food for these picky eaters. Otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of our wildlife as well as the plants. And thinking about the definition of a native plant, we always have to attach a location to that. So actually, I'm going to go back for a second. And so in California, we talk about California native plants. If we were in Florida, we'd be talking about Florida native plants. You can also get very, very local. So we could be talking about plants that are native to your zip code. And so there are more than 7,000 plants that are native to California. And while that's kind of can be an abstract number, I just wanted to give you a sense of how unique and special the plants are that live here. And so this is a little bit of a complicated map, but it's what it's looking at as state endemic plant species. And so what that means is we're counting the number of plants that are unique to the state of California. They exist only in California. You can't find them in any other state. And so the graph goes from 0, which is white, then we go red, yellow, green, blue, and blue is more than 280 plants that are unique to that state. So we have so many plants here that you can't find anywhere else in the country. And so, that doesn't mean that Michigan has no plants. It just means the plants that you find there, you find in all of these other states as well. So protecting this biodiversity that we have here is not just about the plants, but again, these animals that they support as well. So if you want to take a look at the shape that the blue and the green make on this slide here, keep that shape in mind as we go to the next slide. And you'll see this orange shape that's mapped over California. And this is called the California Floristic Province, which is a complicated name, but it's just referring to the area where we have the Mediterranean climate. So that is right now we're in the beginning of long, dry, hot summers, followed by cool, wet winters. And that climate is and that weather is part of what contributes to our biodiversity here. And we have so much biodiversity, in fact, that we've become known as a biodiversity hotspot, which sounds like a great thing, right? Everyone wants to be in a biodiversity hotspot. But unfortunately, in addition to having a lot of biodiversity, the other qualification is that we have lost most of the original habitat for those plants. And so that habitat, I think it's probably not a big surprise to you guys where that habitat went. It's become roads and buildings and space for us. But all of these little green spaces can be turned into a sort of a woven net of habitat connectivity. So, we have 1,600 bees that are native to California. And if they had food, and again, some of those bees are very picky eaters, if they had native plants throughout here instead of non-native plants, we'd be, even this can be habitat for our wildlife, despite all of the concrete. And going back to that number of 7,000 native plants, 52 of those are threatened, 134 are endangered, and more than 2,000 are of conservation concern. So, of course, there's opportunity everywhere. You could plant an endangered species in your front yard, which is, for a lot of other challenges we have, we can't bring an elephant or other wildlife that are facing threats home. But this is a case where you can just bring an endangered species home and give it a place to thrive. And once you start to get to know these plants, what you're going to realize is that each one is its own little universe. So this is a California buckwheat. And what you see here, oops, looks like we have somebody already doing artistic drawings. These are macro photography images. So in the top left corner, you can see this is a Pacific ambush bug that's very camouflaged here in the flowers. This bottom left corner is a little caterpillar that has taken pieces of flour and decorated itself so that it blends right in. In the top, we have another little caterpillar, and then just a close-up on these flowers. But sometimes you really have to look closely to see the wildlife that is there. And this is going back to the Monarch Butterfly and caterpillars. This is a little spot out at the nursery where we have the milkweed here for the caterpillars to eat. And we have a lot of nectar sources, a lot of flowers for the adults. And once the caterpillars are done eating, we're going to zoom into this plant. This is a sacred Detura plant, really beautiful. You can see this little caterpillar has turned upside down and then turned into a chrysalis. So this is where it experiences the transformation or metamorphosis. And it's just this beautiful little green temple. It's a very fun thing to see happen outside in the natural world. Here's a few more little shots of that happening. And as Miles said, oak trees are so important for our local ecosystem. I can't stress that enough. If there's one plant you can plant to help these trees support thousands and thousands of creatures, both above ground and below. Of course, they're very large. So you might not have space for this, and all of these plants are going to support something. But I was really thrilled that he picked the oak tree. And I wanted to give you just a quick little background on who we are and what we do. But this is a historic photo from the first nursery of Theodore Payne in downtown LA in 1903. And when he came to California from England, he saw all of these amazing plants that lived here naturally. And he really urged Californians to cherish them. And he was already very concerned about all of the plants that were bringing in from around the world. And there's so many amazing plants, and I don't want to discourage anyone from planting non-native plants. But having both is really going to support that wildlife, because the plants that are not native to this area are not going to have that relationship with our native bees and our very picky eaters. So they become almost kind of like green furniture in your lawn. But so he came out here, first shop in 1903. Today we're continuing his work. He brought more than 400 species of native plants into the horticultural trade. This is our horticultural building that has our seed collection. This has more than 700 seeds stored in freezers to help preserve that genetic diversity we have here. This is from our propagation yard, growing all these little baby plants. And we have one of the largest selections of native plant too. So inventory is always changing, but we usually have around 900 different species available. We have all kinds of classes, everything from a 3-part design class to pruning and maintenance to we have a free monthly class called Poppy Hour, where we just talk to people who approach this from all different angles, and beautiful demonstration gardens. So it's helpful to know what these plants look like when they're fully grown. We also have a little, about a 1 mile hiking trail and picnic areas. We also have a wildflower hotline. So in the springtime, you can call this number to find out where the best places are to see wildflowers. And of course, volunteers. So if any of you are interested in learning more, we have an amazing crew of volunteers, and it's a fun way to connect with our horticulture team and learn some more about these plants. So we're also online if you're not ready for in-person adventures yet. This is our store is just, you can order almost everything online. You do have to pick up the plants in person. And then I just wanted to end with a little reminder that, we talked about the monarch as one example. This is another example of a very picky eater. This is the El Segundo blue butterfly, and it lives its whole life on the sea cliff buckwheat. And it was listed as an endangered species in the 1970s, but it has a very, very limited habitat on our coastline. And here, locally in Griffith Park, over the past 100 years, they've seen the disappearance of 10 different species of butterflies. So we have so many amazing creatures here that depend on these plants. And so I hope you will come out to the foundation and meet some of these extraordinary creatures we live alongside. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and I'll be here throughout if you have questions. And I'm excited to start painting.
Thank you, Erin. That was awesome. And for all of you guys or ladies that just joined us, we have a free gift for you. So please type in your full name in the chat, and I will give you instructions on how to pick it up from the Theodore Payne Foundation at the end of the workshop.
Great, and I'll take it over again. So we'll go right into watercolor. Okay, and we will show this at the end, and I will plug it into the chat too. But these are some resources that are great for any of you who are interested in, learning about studying our native ecology and these plants. So, of course, the Theodore Payne Foundation, Native Plant Garden Tour, which they do, so you can participate in that. iNaturalist, which is an amazing app for identifying creatures. You can take a picture of them and determine what they are. Calscape is an amazing resource. You can, and this is what Erin was referring to when she talked about zip codes, using zip codes to identify what plants work where you are. It's amazing. You type in your zip code and it can give you, you know, 15 to 50 to 100 plants that are specifically evolved for your area. And then Modern Hiker, another resource in that direction. Okay. So again, our models, Iris douglassiana, the Douglas iris, and the bush monkey flower. So these are the materials that I'm typically using for watercolor. We've got a sketchbook, of course, any kind of watercolor paper. So this is a great time to bring all your materials together. I use a pencil in order to prepare a drawing. I usually use a rag rather than paper towels, because you can also, when you're using watercolor, you can clean your rags and just use them forever. And then a pot of water, brushes, and a palette. My palette is always dirty, and that's okay. So that's that. And these are the brushes that I typically use. So whatever brushes you have can work, but I find these three to be especially useful. The square tip brush allows me to fill in fairly large areas of color, but also to keep a fairly fine edge if I'm, you know, working inside a very specific boundary. The round tip is great for washing in larger areas of color too. And the liner brush is, of course, great for doing lines and refining edges. Okay, so I'm going to take you quickly through the process that I used for these subjects. So I'm doing a watercolor of both the solo flowers and the flowers in the context of the bush that they're participating in. So typically some kind of green backing for the flower. So I always begin with a silhouette drawing. So again, I'll go through this quickly and then I'll go through it slowly as you guys are working on your work. So I begin with silhouette drawing, really getting the basic forms down. So how much and what line do I need to show that it is a Douglas iris? What lines do I need to show that it is a monkey flower? And then what are the basic outlines that I need to show the overall sort of bush layout of these flowers? So you can see with the iris, I don't have any flowers depicted there yet. I'm just putting down the simplest rhythm from the picture that I have in front of me. Of course, this is a very complex picture, but what I can tell is that they are narrow sword-like leaves that sort of flop. You know, they take different directions and they flop. And that's where I'm beginning, and it will develop as I move into my next layers. With the bush monkey flower, again, very complex, all kinds of leaves, all kinds of flowers. So I'm beginning with an overall sort of blob that has the curves and the fine edges that give me a sense of the leaf texture and the texture of the flowers. Oops. All right, so this is the detail drawing. So after I do my silhouette, I go in and I find the features. So think of the facial features, right? So I get sort of a circle for the head or an oval for the head, and then I go in and I find the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. So with my iris here, I'm looking at these central yellow colors. I'm looking at the white as it passes into the purple. And I'm looking at the background leaf texture. So those three take it a lot farther than the first one. But if I'm looking silhouette drawing versus the detail drawing now, okay? Same thing with the monkey flower. It's a little simpler even. And then you can see how I do my second layers when I'm drawing out the bush areas. Again, or I guess I didn't specify this. I don't expect all of you to be painting all four of these. You can choose one, or you can do two if you're a fast artist, but just so you have options and to see them in comparison to each other. Okay, so this is the watercolor based layer. So you can see that I've actually noted the colors that I've used at the top left and the top right. So for the Douglas iris, I'm beginning with a purple, a blue, a yellow, and a green. Because I can see that some of these leaves are more green, some are more blue. And with the flower, I see some of it's more blue, some of it's more purple. And of course, we have the yellow stripes. So those are the basic colors that I'm laying into the drawing. Doing the same thing with monkey flower. You see some orange in the flower, but we can start with a yellow because we can take a yellow and we can make it orange. So basic yellow serves us well there. And you can see with the bushes, I'm really just doing two colors. Now the second layer. This is where I'm bringing color into the pattern that I'm using over those basic colors. So we see here on the iris, I'm going into how the purple moves into the white areas. I'm adding in this shadow here that is happening at the curve of the leaf, it's really helping us make it more three-dimensional, right? So you can either use a warmer purple or a cooler purple. I realized that with the purples that I used in stage 3 here, they were perhaps a little bit cool. So I decided to go in with a warmer version and of course a darker version. Same thing is happening here, bringing in an orange layer over the yellow. And then you can see here with the bush forms, I'm going in with a dark blue or dark green in order to push our flowers forward, right? To create a sort of background for the flowers or backdrop, and also to create some visual interest and rhythm. In this case, it really creates a sense of depth into the bush, right? We're moving from the surface sort of green lit leaves into the shadow areas within the bush. And watercolor detailing. So at this point, I'm going to get out my liner brush and I'm going to refine the image a bit. I'm going to go around petals, go around leaves, just to clarify it. You can see a few different ways that I've done it. And frankly, this might be a good place to stop. I take it 2 more steps beyond this, but this gives us most of what we need, right? It gives us all the basic forms. It gives us the basic colors. It gives us a sense of a little bit of depth and a little bit of volume, and it might be enough. So if you reach that point, that's great. But this is the next step that I have, watercolor glazing. So what that means is I'm mixing up thin layers of color, or sort of little pools of color, and I am applying them over areas where shadow is collecting. So you can see in the iris here, I have a pool of blue that I'm laying around the center of the flower. You can see that I'm doing that here with the monkey flower too. And I'm doing that with the bushes as well. In different areas, you have sort of pools of discoloration, you could say. So it goes from green to kind of a blue-green, or it goes from yellow to orange. And then watercolor final touches. So in this case, you can see the difference between the two. So for the iris, for instance, I'm going in and I'm doing the veins of the flower. I'm using a very thin line and a very watered down color. On the right-hand side, I realized that my monkey flower was too light, so I had to intensify it and lay another wash of yellow over it. And I'm doing some of the similar applications down here with the bush forms. Okay, so that is a walkthrough, and now we're going to move right back to stage 1, and you guys can get started. So I'm here to answer any questions that you have. Of course, we have video, so you can. If you have any questions, you can bring your watercolor up to the camera and I can answer. We'll probably take about 3 or 4 minutes on each one of these stages. If it takes you a little bit longer, that's not a problem, because once we go from stage to stage to stage, stage 2 contains stage 1, stage 3 contains stage 2, etc. So you're not going to miss out on any of the visual information. Watercolor can be tricky. So if you're having any technical issues with just handling the watercolor, while of course it's always best if I'm there to sort of show and help, I can do my best through video here.
Yeah, and if anybody just wants to like unmute themselves at this point and just like chat and like share your process, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
Yeah,
and weird. I'm like wondering, should I put on some background music for everybody?
I think the last time you put it on, it was okay, but it got a little garbled. I think it
got garbled. Oh.
A little bit, yeah.
All right.
But I'll do my best to fill space. And also, again, Erin is here. So if you have any questions about where you live and the kind of space that you have where you could plant a tree, or you could grow some native plants in pots, or you really want to support particular insects, she may have some advice for you on what you can get from Theodore Payne, or how you can research these things, how you can propagate them. So, you've got a direct resource here.
Definitely.
And something that I actually wanted to add to what Erin was saying is sort of in the context of why we're doing this at all, right? So of course we're painting something that's important. She described why it's important scientifically and environmentally and all that. But the reason that we paint, one of the reasons why painters paint, is to celebrate, focus, and glorify, right? So we care about the things that we see all the time. And in California, rather in Los Angeles, we have a very great plant example of where that's been done in perhaps a not so sensitive or environmentally meaningful way. right? So when people think of Los Angeles, they think of palm trees. But palm trees are not our native trees. I believe that there are a couple native palms in Southern California, but here in like the Valley, here in LA proper, again, oak trees and sycamores, a few different varieties of oaks, some of the Palo Verdes that we have as you head farther east. These trees are supporting whole ecosystems, and frankly, they're doing a lot more for us personally. You know, an oak tree gives you a lot more shade than even 10 palm trees, right? So just bearing that in mind, and how people still plant palm trees all the time. Palm trees are especially preserved. You know, they are a symbol of status. They're a symbol of Los Angeles. They're a symbol of Hollywood. And the reason that is because of how Hollywood, as an art form, right, as art makers, have projected that out to the world, right? They've created an aesthetic that people like to identify with. So some of what we're doing here when we're creating watercolors and paintings and a visual culture that relates to something that perhaps has more meaning for the environment, perhaps has more meaning for the native and immigrant peoples here in Southern California, we are creating a visual culture that's based on better footing than, say, the palm trees, for instance. Nothing wrong with a palm tree in here, right? But you know, once you have all this new information, like let's make oak trees the things that we identify with, you know, beautiful Southern California living. You know, let's make these plants and these little universes. I thought one of the most, you know, some of the most beautiful images that Aaron shared were of those very small creatures on the buckwheat, right? You see that at a distance and you just go, oh, it's a bush, right? Nothing special. But then you go up really close and you see a universe, right? And so being able to support universes in our backyards, in our front yards, in our local wild spaces, I think is an amazing thing to represent and celebrate through all the arts, you know, through
one thing I love, one of the things I love in your presentation, Miles, is like the importance of making the invisible visible, right? And like just taking that time to observe something like reveals so much more about it than when we're just kind of passing by and just like not really paying attention. And I mean, I feel like honestly, that's what science is based on, is just like observing and recording, right? And kind of making all these discoveries about incredible things that are happening like right under our noses. And
exactly.
art, I feel like art and the science goes like hand in hand with that, being able to observe and then being able to translate it onto paper.
Yeah, you need cultural change and scientific change. You want, as much as possible, you want them to go hand in hand, right? in the same way, so that it's supporting human beings and it's supporting the science as we know it. Okay, so the silhouette drawing here, I think we can shift over to the greater detail.
Yeah, is everybody comfortable where they're at with their silhouette drawing?
Well, and you got it, you know, all of the silhouette drawing is here in the detail drawing. I know some of you are faster drawers than others, but it's all here. If you have your own way of drawing, that's totally fine too. Of course, this is just how I'm drawing, and I think it's a pretty direct, pretty academic way of how to approach watercolor. And so one of the things that I want to talk about technically here, especially with the Douglas iris up on the left and the monkey flower bush on the bottom right, is you have some patterns that are extremely complex when you observe them, but we have to simplify them, right? And we want to simplify them in such a way that they are still identifiable, but that they are manageable, right? So when we look at this sort of the purple that's bleeding in the white of the iris here, that's really complicated. And of course I could draw or paint it at that level of detail, but I'm going to reduce it. I'm going to abstract it into what you see here with the sort of zigzag at the edges, because I know that I can take that zigzag and I can make it more detailed if I need to in order to bring it closer to my photo reference here, or I can leave it fairly simple and we're still going to be able to identify it as a Douglas iris. All right, so that's one example. Here with the leaves behind, I mean, I actually followed the photograph pretty closely in that way. But you know, you don't have to reproduce what you see here. As long as you're getting the overall pattern, the relationship between the iris and the leaves behind it, you're going to accomplish something that is identifiable. On the bottom right with the monkey flower bush. So I took the edges here and I created a little more sort of space between the points at the edge of the bush, because it does have a bit of a, it's a little bit spikier than the way I did it. You know, some plants have a very sort of soft, rounded form. Like if you think of, say, a dandelion, which is like a little fluff ball, right? And some have a spikier overall format. You know, a good example would be a palm tree. An oak tree is that way too. You have fairly sort of spiky leaves and you have a lot of sort of pointed branches. Sometimes from a distance, you know, it has an overall curved effect. But with our monkey flower bush, I had to get both the spikes and the curves, and you had a lot of clusters of flowers. So typically when you have like, you know, hundreds or thousands of flowers or thousands or millions of leaves, a good way to represent so that the type is identifiable and we can tell that it is, you know, a bunch of leaves, is to have at least two different kinds of shape. One would be the collection shape. So this is a collection of flowers. You know, all of these are different collections of flowers. And then you have little isolated flowers. And if you do a good sort of balancing between the collections, these collection shapes, and these individual shapes, you'll reach that point where you are creating something that looks like what you're looking at, and that is manageable, right? Because if I tried to draw all the leaves or all the flowers, maybe I could do it, but it would take hundreds of hours. And there's no reason to do that when, you know, we don't need it. We don't need to do that, right? We only need to communicate as much as we need to in order to get across our purpose, which is identification. So we'll take another, I think, 30 seconds with the detail drawing here. Mm-hmm. The detail drawing, again, shows up completely in our first watercolor wash. And we'll take a little bit more time with the color washes because I know that painting can sometimes take a bit more time. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm doing the irises in the bunch of them. And how do you, when the flower is facing different directions, how do you just, you know, do that? Because I don't have the flower in front of me. I can't turn it different directions. So how do you get the, you know, a realistic or, you know, shape?
Sure. So with the iris here, what I'm doing is identifying the overall kind of a general shape idea from the picture that I see here. So something that I can tell from the irises is that they open up and the petals flop out, right? So like when I'm putting, so some of the petals go up, the central petals go up, and then the outside petals flop out. So when I look at this one, for instance, this shape that I've drawn, yeah, I'm drawing out the different sort of tongues of the petals, and then I'm drawing these central curves. So I'm doing the same thing here. So it's shifting a little bit in its angle, but it's pretty much the same kind of shape. I'm doing the same thing here. You know, I don't see a petal coming down this way because we have the leaf in front of us. Doing that here, and I'm doing that here. So as long as I have, you know, I have maybe 4 or 5 or 6 petals that are flopping over, and then I have 2 petals or 3 petals that are going up, it's going to give us an overall iris effect. Does that make sense?
Okay. All right. Yes, thank you.
Yes, you're good. Great. You're welcome. And of course, you know, all these things take practice and time and experience, but I think that's a pretty easy solve for that one. And of course, with the monkey flower, I have, you know, 5 petals that I'm dealing with. So you can see when I'm drawing out my little individual flowers, in some cases, you know, I leave them the shape kind of unclear because they might be sort of folding in on each other, or, you know, we're seeing them from a distance, so we can't really tell the 5 shapes or the 5 individual petals, but you experiment with it. You know, you see how much detail, how much specificity helps to create a solid picture or a solid depiction. Okay, so we'll move on to the watercolor. So this is a watercolor base layer. So again, you can see how many colors I chose to use on the top left and the top right. So, you know, we've got green, yellow, purple, and blue on the top left. And we've got blue, green, and yellow on the top right. So I'm using basic yellows here. I think these were lemon yellows. You can really use whatever yellow you happen to have, whether it's in a tube watercolor or in a dry cake watercolor set. Either will work just fine. And one of the recommendations that I have when our general painting tip, green is one of the most sensitive colors. The reason being, as creatures, we co-evolved with plants to be able to detect how green is moving over green, say if we're in Africa and a predator is in the bush, right? Or to see how, fruits and nuts are growing out of a plant. We are extraordinarily sensitive to the range of greens out in nature. And so there's no particular technical direction from that point, but what I would do when you're painting leaves or anything naturally green is to begin with very basic, blue and yellow and light green washes so that you can easily change them. Don't go in with a really heavy green at the very beginning, like a big grass green, because you'll find that green shifts very visibly and very radically. And it's nice with watercolor to give yourself a light wash to work on top of, so if something is, so for instance, like if I'm looking at this, if this is too yellow, too much of a yellow green, I can go over with a little bit of blue. If this is too cool, I can go over with a little bit of yellow. If it's a more dull green, I can go over even with a little bit of red or orange, a very thin wash, and it's going to help to dull it out, make it a little more earthy, push it back. But green is a very, very special color for the reason that I was describing. We're highly, highly sensitive to variations in greens. Another issue with doing yellows is that it's very easy to pollute your yellow in watercolor. So when you are painting your yellows, highly recommend that you make sure your brush is totally clean and that you are preparing your little puddle of yellow separate from the other colors. Because a yellow will become brown or a yellow will become green like nothing. It's just a little bit of color in your brush, that remains in your brush that's going to change that yellow from a pure color to one that is accidentally dirty. So that's that. See if there's anything else to describe at this point. General recommendation with watercolor is you can see that I've left white spaces, right? So watercolor typically requires a little bit more planning than acrylic or oil painting in terms of representing an object, representing a visual experience. Because if you take away the white, you can't really get it back. So what I'm observing here with Iris is that, of course, we have the whites along the petals. We also have some distinct highlights in some of these petals. So I am deliberately leaving them open. Right? I'm doing blue around the white. I'm leaving the white around the central yellow, the blue going in from the sides. And that will really pay off as we move forward, leaving those white spaces. With the monkey flower, I didn't leave any whites. I just started with a very light yellow because I can create a sense of highlight by darkening the central areas and leaving the light yellow at the tips or at the edges. So we'll take another 40, 45 seconds on this one.
Hi, this is Diana. I have a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I'm just doing Zoom on my phone. My phone got hung up for quite a while. So I'm not a natural artist. And for me, just doing the silhouette drawing is going to be hard. So did you say anything about that when you started out, like how one can start doing that?
Oh, sure. What I would say is, natural artist is a funny thing to say. I think everybody, human being, our heritage is art. We sing, we dance, we play music, we draw, we paint. And it's not about skill, really, right? It's about looking, observing, learning, and translating, which we all do in different ways. So as far as getting good at this, it's all practice. Watercolor is a very difficult medium to get really, really good at it. What I'm doing here in these, at in these different layers, I don't think is it's definitely not the hardest thing to do. But if you're moving slow with it, that's not a problem. That probably just means that you're paying more attention. You know, you're looking closely at your subject and you're trying to translate the information. The more you do it, the faster you'll get at it. It's really just like that. It's like learning another language. You know, if you're deliberately trying to learn French or Spanish or German or something like that.
It's totally okay if you're just have like a blob to begin with, you know, like it's not, I feel like it's just getting comfortable with the medium and that's that. Like it's okay to make mistakes in art. That's
well, and know this too, is you're going to get the benefits from drawing and painting whatever the image looks like. You taking the time to look at these flowers, try to understand what you're looking at, try to get it on a piece of paper is going to bring you closer to that object. It's going to make you more sensitive to it. It's going to make you more receptive to information about these things. It's going to perhaps increase your enjoyment of life, where you'll go around and you'll look at flowers in a new way because you painted them. So even if the picture that you created is not, you know, a Van Gogh, you know, Van Gogh, of course, did a lot of irises. He loved irises. It's not a Van Gogh iris. That's not a problem. Not at all. You know, the look of your image will get better and better the more you practice, but the value of drawing and painting is inherent. You get closer to the thing, you become more sensitive to it, and you become a deeper thinker by painting and drawing things. Does that help, or was that too spacey?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. I was going to say too, just a great way, of course, to observe these is, and I'm biased because I'm a daughter of one of the considered, I'm just going to brag on her because she's not alive, one of the 3 considered founding mothers of Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. Is
Oh, wow.
to just go into our you know, our local mountains and observe. Of course, you know, there are non-natives that are there, brought by early European settlers, but you know, they're excellent examples. Indian paintbrush, I'm thinking of ceanothus, mountain lilac, you know, all kinds of things that we can observe and see that are natives, just within context of the natural environment outside. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I definitely found for myself, you know, I grew up in the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains and grew up hiking and all that. And of course I knew about oak trees and some of the different chaparral plants, but I only started really loving it the more I learned about it, you know. So much is like that, right? Like science can be a real inducement for greater love and satisfaction in things. You know, once you know what makes a rainbow, yeah, rainbow is beautiful on its own, but once you understand the extraordinarily complex physics and chemistry that goes into these things that we find beautiful naturally, it just gives them another level, right? And so, yeah, going around the Santa Monicas now, I can identify things. I can go, oh, that's that, and I know that that supports that, and that these oak trees are acting as a nursery for all these other plants. And it makes it into something that I can relate to a lot better than just, oh, it's a beautiful landscape. But that's wonderful that you have that in your family. All right. Any other color questions? Watercolor questions?
I had one other quick question. I see that I can't see on my screen here, but stage 3 you have watercolor base layer, but it looks like you've actually kind of outlined, like I'm looking at the iris, you outline it as you were painting it. So I thought that was outlining it was the stage you did later, but you start out by outlining it with the watercolor?
You mean the pencil outlines here?
No, it looks like as I look at the iris that you have like a border of like a little darker purple or lavender.
Oh, I see.
Around each, yeah.
So,
each petal.
when you're painting, so that's the effect of water, right? And you get greater control over water and the family of techniques we could call bleeds. So as you can see here on this petal and on this petal here, I allowed the water to pool a little bit more so that when the pigment settled into the paper, it created more of an edge effect. which is just a little more pleasing. Rather than it sort of looking wishy-washy, it actually sort of draws a line for me. Does that make sense? So as the water dries, it kind of draws into the paper.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's what that is. It's a part of watercolor technique. All right, so I'm going to move on to our follow-up here, the second layer pattern. In this case, I'm doing, of course, detailing on the petals. I'll explain this a little bit more. So with the central dark that you have here at the core of the iris, now that is a mixture of purple and blue and a little bit of a complementary color. So I imagine some of you know what complementary colors are. Complementary color is the opposite color on the color wheel. In this case, if I'm using violet or purple, the opposite is yellow. So I'm mixing that in and it gives me a nice coloristic brown. And when I say that, I mean, it gives me a sort of shadow color that is relevant to the color family that I'm working inside of, right? So if I want to take a purple object and darken it and make it look more realistic, like it is a dark purple, I'm going to mix the opposite color much of the time. So that's how I came to this brown. If you just mix a brown straight from your watercolor palette, it's probably not going to be appropriate to this environment. It's not going to be a purple specific brown. So it's going to begin with purple, add in a little bit of yellow, or perhaps add in a little bit of orange, depending on the degree of warmth that you want. And that's going to get you to something that really reads nicely. Or the purple that we have running along the petals, I mixed up a warmer violet or a warmer purple. I neutralized it a little bit, added a little bit of yellow, but I wanted to keep the color pretty brilliant. I wanted to keep it pretty bright. You can also see that for the leaves around the iris, I have put in some edge shadows. So I took a little bit of blue and I darkened around the leaf here. I took a little bit of green and I darkened around the yellow. And that creates something a little bit more like the sort of texture and light layout that you have on each one of these leaves, at least for the way that I approached it. The monkey bush flower, I think, is a little bit simpler, right? You have a fairly clear pattern here, right? You've got the orange there in the center and you've got the orange along the petals. One important point here is that you can tell that the shape here is not as distinct as I made it in the drawing. However, it seemed to me like a pretty worthwhile simplification of what I was observing here. It definitely becomes more orange, and it seems to have this forked look. So I decided to go with that, started there, and even though it's maybe a little more graphic or a little more drawn out than the actual flower is, it definitely tells us what species we're looking at. So it worked for the sake of identification. One way you can think about it is kind of like caricature. I'm sure you all have seen really great caricatures that don't photographically look like the person, but look so much like the person because of the patterns or the features that have been selected. And so that's what I'm doing here with the monkey flower. As far as the bushes down at the bottom, you can see that I add in a lot of dark accents in order to create deep spaces in the bushes and surface spaces in the bushes. So we've got a light green surface on the monkey bush, and then we've got a dark blue with a little bit of neutralization, right? So I took blue, I added a little bit of orange to it in order to neutralize it so that it's not like a super brilliant watery blue, and then that pushed back into the bush. I also added a touch of green in order to get it close. So when mixing colors like this, especially with watercolor, a good way to think about it is like making a recipe, right? So if I'm making a shadow for a monkey, if I'm making a shadow for a monkey bush for dinner, and if I'm making a shadow for a monkey bush, I'm beginning with the base green. I'm adding in the shadow color, which would be blue in this case. So I've got green and I've got blue. I want it to be a little more neutral. So I'm adding in the complements. So I'm going to add in a little bit of orange to the blue in order to make it a neutral shadow. So green, blue, and orange. And if it needs to be a touch warmer, I might add in a little bit of red. If I need it to be a touch cooler, I might add in a little bit of blue. And of course, you have warm and cool versions of so many colors, especially when we're talking about greens, especially when we're talking about yellows and blues. So bearing that in mind when you're painting. You'll see how they look on the page, you'll see how they mix, and you'll get a good sense of the temperature that you're working with. Am I making this too cool, too warm? Do I need to add a cool color? Do I need to add a warm version of this color in order to bring it closer to what I'm looking at? Okay, that we'll take another minute or so on the second layer. Of course, another thing while I'm holding on these images, if you're painting quickly, the flower is there, so you can go farther with detail as you like. You can move at your own pace, in other words. Any other questions at this point? They can be general art questions or general watercolor questions. If you're looking to get into this, or how to get good at it, the kind of practice that works, or that has worked in my experience as a teacher and a professional painter. I'm happy to share any thoughts on all of it.
And if anybody has any questions regarding 1111 and the work that we do, please feel free to chime in as well.
Oh, I should also note that, like I said at the beginning, the mural is still underway, and if anybody wants to volunteer, we're absolutely welcome to volunteer. Jackie, who's on, we actually have the superstar volunteer on the call right now, Jackie Palmer, who just waved. But if anybody else would like to, I think it's a lot of people have a great time with it. Pretty meditative. You're a part of building, a monument in the community. This is an official mural. It's going up on a public building. It's going to be there for a good long time. So if you want to participate, you can contact us. I guess I should put my email in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Let me do that. So for everyone, for Mural Volunteering.
And Miles, if you also want to put in the link to the Valley Art Academy for people to know about classes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So is that it looks like there's an entire family. Oh, oh, it's the students. Hi, everybody. The Narknosaurns. Good to see you. So those are actually some of my students. The entire family's painting. That's great.
I love this. Yeah.
But yes, so for Mural Volunteering, you can contact me there. So yes, I teach classes. So yeah, some of my students and actually some former students I think are on too. I think Shannon's here. Say hi, Shannon, if you're out there. But you can find us through Valley Art Academy. Currently, we have kids classes that are 10 to 18 years old. We go a little bit beyond in one direction or another. We also have life drawing classes that we host, nude model life drawing classes where we have high school students that are working on their figure drawing skills to become animators and concept artists and stuff like that, as well as all kinds of amateur and professional artists who come to participate and develop their skills. If any of you want to do watercolor figure drawing or figure painting, that's available to you. Come out for that. But in any case, you can reach out to me for any of it, as you have my email, and you can find us at valleyartacademy.com. Is it .org or .com?
.org.
.org, right. Let me type it. That's available to everybody.
Miles, for somebody that's like starting out, would you recommend acrylics or watercolor?
I would generally recommend acrylic, or rather watercolors. I think they are so, what's wonderful about watercolors is they are so easy to get into and they can take so long to master. Mm-hmm. So watercolor is going to give you so many skills and sensitivities that are going to help you if you want to become if you want to become an acrylic artist or you want to become an oil artist, it's just going to be a beautiful way to set your skills up. And it costs very little. You can do it on the go. It is typically very low toxicity. You know, you can get all earth paints if you want, you know, just made from earth-based minerals rather than some from, say, like heavy metals like cadmiums and cobalts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend watercolor in that way. Also, in general, watercolor is great because you can reactivate the paints, right? When you're done with the set, you can just drop your brush. I mean, I always recommend cleaning your brush, but you can drop your brush. You're not going to hurt it. You can leave the colors dry and you can reactivate them. Acrylic is plastic, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're using acrylic for our mural because it's really the only material that makes sense for an outdoor mural. But I don't, personally, I don't like using it that much because it dries so quickly. Of course, it's made out of plastic and there are particular issues with that. And that's it. I also use gouache. So for any of you who are interested in creating more opaque paintings that are perhaps a little closer to acrylic or to oil, gouache is a really great option. Let's see. So Charlene asked me, where is the mural going to be painted? So the mural is currently being painted. I'd say we're about 75, 80% done. It's, but there's still a lot of volunteer work available. It's on the City Council District 3 building, which is right across, directly across from the West Valley Regional Branch Library. It is very close to the intersection of Van Owen and Tampa, between Tampa and Reseda on Van Owen. Okay, so let me click and we'll move to the watercolor detailing. So this is really just an outlining stage where we are clarifying the image that we're looking at. You see that in a bunch of the watercolors the naturalist watercolors. You often see that the edges are often very cleanly and darkly laid in so that it really pops against the white paper. So that's really the point here. This is more of a design stage rather than an observation stage. What I would say technically is that with the iris on the left-hand side, I am using a dark blue in order to push the flower forward a little bit. And on the bush, the monkey flower rather, I'm putting a sort of dark, warm color. You can see that I'm using kind of a neutral orange or a neutral red in order to push that flower forward and to differentiate it from the leaves behind, which are outlined in blue. So that's that. This detailing stage isn't very technically complicated, and you can move through it pretty quickly. This also helps you to eliminate some of the pencil lines. Pencil lines are not really a problem. They don't look that bad, but it allows you to reinforce that outline and to darken and to really use it so that it's not just a preparatory drawing, but it becomes something that supports the painting.
I have a technical question.
Sure.
When you're doing watercolor and something's like already dried, is there, and you want to lighten it, do you just like add more water, or can you add another, like what, with acrylics you would add white or? So
this varies quite a lot. So yes, you can return to white, depending on your techniques. You can use white watercolor, which is typically a zinc white. You can use white gouache, which is a thicker form of watercolor. It's like poster paint. You can use, depending on the paper you're using, you might have a paper that's very erasable or very crumbly. And you can use, like a magic rub or a very sort of thick eraser, and you can pull back and create a kind of torn paper look over the lighter areas.
Okay.
But they're all going to be different kinds of white. So, pulling, you can also, like you were suggesting, you can mix up a bunch of clean water and you can sort of rub it over an area, pull it away with a paper towel or with a rag, and that's going to take color off, of course. But the final color look that you're going to get is going to vary. So you're going to get different kinds of whites. Right, so leaving the white is going to give you the cleanest, sort of shiniest white. Pulling out a white is going to give you a more kind of muted white that might work well on skin, for instance.
Yeah.
Where there are a lot of highlights, but there are also a lot of pores. It's oily. It's more complicated. If you're doing metal, for instance, you might really want to really specifically leave those whites because you want a really sort of sharp, hard reflection.
Got it.
Sure. So I think everybody, we have another 15 minutes or so, and highly suggest stay on the call for that remaining time, because we're going to take a picture of everybody and their paintings at the end, if you want to participate, of course. But we would love to do that with you all, and I'd love to see what you guys produce. So we'll take another, I think, minute on the detailing stage here.
And I guess I will invite everybody again who didn't hear me the first or second or third time, that we have a very special gift for all of you guys that attend the workshop at the Theodore Paint Foundation. So if you guys put in your full name in the chat, this will confirm that you will be picking it up, and I will give you pickup instructions after the workshop is done. So just type in your name in the chat.
Can we say what the gift is, or is it a surprise?
I mean,
Yeah, I was just gonna ask.
Yeah, you made it very Secret Santa.
it's Secret Santa. No,
Yeah.
of course we can say what it is.
Yeah.
Erin, do you want us to tell them what it is?
Sure. So we have two different kinds of seeds for you. We have the narrow leaf milkweed, which is for the monarch caterpillars, but it also attracts all kinds of other amazing pollinators to your yard. And it's super easy to grow from seed. And most of the California natives, you actually have to wait till fall to plant them, but this is the one you can plant right now. And then we also have poppy seeds. And those, if you want, you can scatter them now. And then if we have rain, or if you water them a little bit during the winter, if we don't have rain, those will come out in the springtime. And then we also have a little sticker for you. And yeah, so we hope that you come pick up your seeds.
Come pick up your seeds. And also the Theodore Paint Foundation it's really, really pretty right now. We did a little hike. They have a wildflower hike there that's really lovely, and they have they have a few demonstration gardens there that are really nice. So highly recommend that you guys visit this beautiful, well, for me it was like I'm like so close to it, and it felt like I discovered a secret garden, because I've never been there. I had no idea it was there, and I just loved it. So I highly recommend everybody go pay them a visit.
Okay, and so the next stage here, watercolor glazing. So like I mentioned before, some of this, we might have been done at, if you would like, you can sort of wrap up here at watercolor detailing and just refine what you've already got. For watercolor glazing, you're mixing up a lot of water and just a little bit of color, and you are thinly laying it over with one wash as much as possible, because if you do a lot of repeated brush strokes, it's easy, like I was talking about with Addie, to pull up the color. So you want to try to use one wash in order to just lay that in. You can see that I'm doing that in all of these. For the monkey flower, I put it over as sort of a central shadow. Right, so I'm putting the blue over there. I'm putting a little bit of a red, sort of a warming color, over the iris. And an important point about color here, when you're looking at the iris that I've painted and the iris in the picture, you can tell that the color is different, right? I do not have the same brilliant purple that we're observing here. However, we can still create an overall sense of the relationship between the colors by how we place our warms, our cools, our lights, and our darks. So even though this isn't perfectly the color that I'm observing, both because of the paints that I have and because of mistakes that I might have made in the painting process, you can correct for that as you're moving forward. That applies to all kinds of painting. There are plenty of great portraits out there that don't really look like skin tones. that are still really beautiful because the arrangement of the colors still look like skin, they still read as a natural surface, and they are independently beautiful. You know, going back to somebody like Van Gogh, you know, all of us are familiar with certain pictures of his. Beautiful portraits, very few of them are realistic, right? They're quite expressionistic in their way, but they still read very much, intensely, even as people, sometimes more than very realistic pictures. So that applies even to relatively realistic painting, like what we're doing here. Yeah, it looks like we have a good number of people who've signed up for their seeds. I think a really empowering thing about learning about plants like this, or the other mural that we did within this series was about soil health, is how potential the earth is, right? It's not, you know, like Aaron was bringing up, it's not about, you know, we talk a lot about saving exotic species, right? We talk about, you know, saving the rainforest, or we talk about saving a whale, or we talk about saving an orangutan, and all of that's very important, of course, but just really knowing, like, what are the species where we live? How can I use the little bit of land or the little bit of soil that I have access to in order to create a harbor for those, so that we're able to move things in that direction? I think that that's an extraordinarily empowering thing. It brings you a lot closer to the earth in a very real way. And not that many people know about it. So you get to be a sort of a hero in your own neighborhood. You can explain it to your neighbors, you can explain it to your family. And I think it's really appealing to a lot of people that just don't hear about the ability to create a pollinator garden, right? Or the ability to you know, put you know, there's so many houses that you see where they have just an open, sort of dusty front yard where, you know, they have dead grass, or it's just dirt, or whatever it is, and they could be planting a tree that acts as an island of life, you know, in that entire neighborhood. That's an incredible power that we have as stewards, you know, as people that are able to take care of the earth around us. Okay, so after watercolor glazing here, final touches. So I imagine that throughout this entire watercolor process, you've been making corrections, you've been making final touches in order to finish something off, right, to take it to a place where it looks right to you. So what I did for my final touches here is, as you can see, I brought in the veins, and I really intensified, I really deepened some of the patterns that I have here in my iris. And I really had to warm up the monkey flower. It was getting, it was too pale the entire time. So you might find that you have other kinds of final moves to make. Maybe you need to make something cooler or warmer, maybe you need to make it darker, whatever it is. We're at 6:54, so let's take another minute here, and then you know, we'd love to see everybody's watercolors, so you can hold them up to the screen. You know, you can just do, so this is my watercolor page, right? So you can just sort of hold it up like that. We'll do that soon enough. Addie will take a picture of it all, and I think everybody has the resources they need here. Let me actually quickly. So resources. So some of the primary resources were Calscape. So this is an amazing resource if you want to look up the plants that are native to your area that really work with your climate, in your microclimate even. So like I live in Woodland Hills, Tarzana area, and I was just having fun with the tool and looking at what works where. And I'm a very specific area, southwest San Fernando Valley up against the Santa Monica Mountains. And that's quite different from, going right over the hill towards Malibu. There are going to be a lot of shared species, but there are going to be different species too, if I'm right there on the beach. So Calscape was one, iNaturalist, so identification app.
One thing I'll say about iNaturalist is that, so if you find, these creatures in your yard, there's so many things that you'll discover. But sometimes it's really hard to figure out what they are. And there's so many scientists on iNaturalist. So when I first started gardening with California native plants, one day I was weeding and I found a salamander, and it just blew my mind. And I was like, there's I couldn't believe it. And I took a picture and I put it on iNaturalist. And I knew that the Natural History Museum was doing a research project. And so I was actually able to upload it to be a data point in their research. And then I had the curator of herpetology, which is just a fancy way of saying study of reptiles, IDing the salamander in my yard. So it was this very cool way that I could connect with scientists and also just find out what this creature was. It was so cool.
Yeah, that kind of citizen science and sort of a private land, using private land for public purposes is really great. So much of the land in the United States, let alone California, is owned privately. And, whatever it's owned for, whether it's agriculture, whether it's, private residences, whether it's parks, whatever it is, it can be used better, right? With better information, with understanding of how land can be maximized, we can support all of these creatures. We can create more food at a lower cost and with less water. Like, all of these things come through land consciousness. And I think that's an amazing resource. I actually didn't know that you could do that kind of citizen science work with iNaturalist. I'm definitely going to download it now. I have a plant identification app, but I don't have one that's more general. Okay, so I think let's, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you won't see these references anymore, but this will be the great reveal. And then, of course, if anybody has any final questions, you can ask those. Well, I'll stop sharing now. And Addie, if you want to, I guess, put up a grid.
I'll do a screenshot if everybody puts up their painting up to the camera, and then I can do a screenshot of your work.
Yeah, so don't be shy. Of course, you don't have to do it, but. Oh,
I love it.
Oh, great. Oh, that's beautiful, Erin.
This was hard.
Yeah,
and also so much fun. I haven't painted in years.
Great. Monkey flower, Addie's monkey flower. Bobby, that's amazing. It definitely looks like Irish bush. Beautiful. Really well done.
Not done. It's not done, but.
No, but that's totally in the right direction. The nice thing about watercolor too is you don't need that much detail. At a certain point, watercolor kind of tells you to stop touching it.
Yeah,
you kind of do enough. And I think that looks beautiful.
Really nice.
Wow, you guys are amazing.
Just all these naturalists, right, in our community. This is amazing. So if you want to pick up your seats, you just have to go to the Theodore Payne Foundation between June 15th, but no later than July 6th, between 8:30 and 4:30, and just go to their checkout area, let their staff know that you're there to pick up your gift from 1111 ACC, and then just give them your name, and that's that. If you guys have any further questions, please feel free to email us, either myself, Miles, or Erin. And we are so delighted that you were able to join us today. I don't know if there are any other closing remarks from Erin or Miles, or if there are any other questions. The floor is you guys. So.
Yeah, well, like Erin was saying, now is not generally the planting season. So if any of you are interested, in planting trees or in getting some of these native shrubs in your area, now is a great time to sort of plan out what that could look like. So, if you're fortunate enough to have a backyard or a front yard, walk around and see where's an open spot, or, where could I start doing this, and get those thoughts going. And of course, going to Theodore Payne is going to get, a lot of it going, because you'll see what these mature plants look like. But I think I'll leave it there.
Awesome.
I want to thank you very much. This was really enjoyable.
Great.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Miles, I've watched you on some of the things I've gotten from 1111, and I know that you teach there. Do you teach watercolor as well? Because all I've seen is the drawing classes.
Oh, I do teach watercolor. I don't have a specified class, but I've taught watercolor to adults, and I've taught it within the scope of my classes. So the life
So
drawing
you
class
do
I've
it
done-
individually or what?
Yes, so I do individual watercolor classes.
And
so
what
feel
about
free to-
gouache?
Gouache is more of my specialty, actually. I use
Okay.
gouache more than base watercolor. But yeah, if anybody wants to find my work, you can go to, I'll put it in the chat here. It's mileslewisstudio.com. And yeah, you can find what I'm doing. A lot of it is water-based. It's watercolor or it's gouache. And yeah, if you're interested in it educationally, reach out. I'm here. I know most of you are in the LA area, so I'm a resource for that.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Yes, thanks for
Thank you,
coming out.
Erin, so much. This was awesome.
Thank you guys. This was
Bye.
great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.